Thanks so much, Joan. It's really nice that you organized this conference, and what an important set of issues you've been dealing with here. So I'd like to start our discussion today with a little bit of an overview of European dependency on Russian fossil fuels, how this links into the whole question of climate change and some of the new directions that we're seeing in energy policy as a result of what you could call these joint crises, the Russian war crises, as well as the climate change crisis. You may be aware that Europe for quite some time now, for several decades, has taken climate change quite seriously. It's been in the view of some actors, something of a leader in bringing forth policies and programs to deal with climate change. So that's part of the background that it's important to know about. But there's been another element of this development that hadn't until the war, the Russian war on the Ukraine, received as much attention. And that is the continued dependency on fossil fuels, as well as Europe's very high level of energy import dependency for fossil fuels. And I'd like to thematize that a little bit and look at how the war has started to change this and how it's impacting upon German and European climate policies and programs. So if you look at the end of last year, you would see that Europe was very heavily dependent on Russia for its fossil fuels. It was getting some 40% of its crude oil, as well as of its natural gas from Europe, and also a very high percentage of its coal from Russia. What we've seen as a result of the war and the breakout of the war is a very dramatic change in where Europe is importing from, and also efforts to reduce the use of fossil fuels. And I'll talk you through a few examples of that. Most dramatic right now, of course, is the question of gas. And gas is an interesting topic to look at because gas was also part of the efforts to find a bridge to a future of renewable energy. So as Europe was expanding renewables, gas was kind of seen as the bridge fossil fuel. It was considered the cleaner of the fossil fuels, and the fossil fuel that would help us make the transition in a not too painful way to something going in the direction of a renewable energy future. So the gas import dependency in Europe, very high in some countries, including in Germany, which was getting 55 to 60% of its gas from Russia at the beginning of this year. And what's quite remarkable is that as of today, it's down to at about 8%. So the import dependency on Russia has been very much reduced. In part, that's a German decision. In part, it's a Russian decision because Russia is also just not letting the gas flow right now. And of course, you've also heard about the explosions that happened with some of the gas pipelines. But I think what's really important to see here is that while on the one hand, this is leading to a real price crisis, fossil fuel prices have gone through the roof. We've seen real concerns about how people are going to heat their homes in the months ahead. We've also seen substantial steps taken to fill the gas tanks to help us make it through the summer, the storage tanks, and efforts at energy saving. So we've seen households cutting back on their energy use. We've seen industries cutting back on their energy use. The statistics that you see vary a little bit, but somewhere on the order of 8 to 9% cut back on gas use by households, and a somewhat higher percentage by industry. What's also happening, which I think is pretty interesting, is that this new crisis is helping to advance efforts to deal with climate change. There's a big push now, and I think we're going to hear more about that from Michèle, to expand renewable energy use and the speed with which renewable energy capacity is developed. Germany has changed its laws and has set even higher targets than it had before. So there are now targets to have as much as 85% of electricity supplied by renewables by the end of this decade, and 100% by mid next decade. So renewable energies are getting a big push forward. Energy efficiency is getting a big push forward. And at the same time, we are seeing a strengthening of interdependencies within Europe. So we're seeing more and more European countries looking at how they can cooperate and together make it through this crisis. The most recent announcement, for example, is a German-Spanish decision to build a gas pipeline over the Pyrenees so that you can basically export gas that might be coming with LNG terminals from Spain to Germany, or as is now being done, that France is exporting gas to Germany and Germany is exporting electricity to France in order to help neighboring countries make it through this difficult time. So these crises are leading to what I would say is kind of a new European look at energy. It's also speeding up the energy transition to a clean energy future. But it's also one, and I'll end my comments with this, it's also one that could be politically very dramatic and challenging, with increasing energy prices, with a lot of people wondering how they're going to make it through the winter, with inflation going at rates of 8, 9, 10%, depending on the country of Europe. It means that you are also establishing fertile ground for political parties that might choose to question these developments. And so there are a lot of concerns about what can be done to make sure that people are not left in the cold, that subsidy programs are developed for households that are not so well off, and that we make it through the winter working cooperatively rather than as a fragmented society or as a fragmented Europe. I obviously could speak a lot longer, but just to give all the panelists a chance to make some opening remarks, I'll stop here and turn the floor back to Joan.